Module 2 will continue to look at the early period of labor history in New Jersey, but we'll move up a little bit into the 19th century. What we'll be seeing in the 19th century is primarily the collision of the early craft form of work with the developing industrial revolution in America. Now, we talked earlier about the need for certain craft workers in the ironworks and the glassworks that had the advanced skills needed to make iron and glass. But there were many other areas as well that required craft workers: blacksmiths, shoemakers, bakers, and on and on. There were quite a few different crafts that were needed in early America. And in fact, they were needed going far back into medieval Europe. And at that time, they were part of what was known as the medieval guild system. In the guild system, the people that did each craft were members of a guild, and the members of the guilds were on three levels. The highest level were the masters. The masters were the ones, as the name implies, that had mastered the craft. They owned their own workshops and employed others. They employed the other two levels. The first level, the way that people got into this system, was as apprentices. They would often start as boys, work perhaps till the age of 21, and they would do whatever the master told them to do, but they were also learning all the aspects of the craft, learning how to make shoes, how to be a carpenter, or whatever the particular craft was. When they had completed their apprenticeship, they became what was known as journeymen. As the name here implies, they journeyed from place to place, working for different masters and further polishing their skills. When they had reached the point of mastery, they too could open their own shops and become masters and employ others. During the long centuries of the guild system, many traditions developed. There were not only methods of work, there was also a language that was used by people that did that work. There were rituals, there were traditions of drinking, and on and on. And a lot of this culture was carried into the United States, not every part of the old guild system of Europe, but many parts of it. And so among skilled workers who were able to enter the guild system as apprentices, there was an expectation that they would be able to advance to journeymen and then become masters. By the way, the apprenticeships and therefore the membership in the guilds in general were usually quite limited as to who they would admit. With few exceptions, the 19th century guilds were almost all white male. But as we read the chapters from Benjamin in this module's readings, we'll learn a lot about the very interesting traditions of the craft form of work. Now, in the 19th century, these old craft traditions hit up against what was known as the market revolution, which was connecting the agricultural areas, the rural workshops, with the developing towns and cities, and interconnecting the whole country in an economic network that became known as the market revolution. And this also tied in with the developing industrial revolution, which we'll be talking about more in following weeks. One of the requirements of this market revolution was the development of improved transportation systems, in particular canals and then later on railroads. So what happened in this environment was that certain masters who were more successful than others became some of the first factory owners, and the journeymen that worked for them began to look more like ordinary factory operatives who would never be able to advance to the level of master themselves. And it was these journeymen that formed some of the first craft unions. Now, they tapped into many of the old traditions of the medieval guilds, but they also were strong trade unions. Now, in New Jersey in the 19th century, there were some strikes by unskilled workers that were generally unsuccessful, but craft workers in several different crafts were able to form stable unions. These included carpenters, shoemakers, building trades in Trenton, New Brunswick, Newark, and so on. And many of these journeymen began to develop more of a critique of industrial capitalism, and some of them formed working men's parties, such as one in 1830 in Newark, and later on other socialist parties as well. But a very important feature of craft unions was the development of solidarity. Now, this is a term that you hear a lot in labor circles, and we will revisit it again in this course. But the solidarity that existed at this point, for the most part, was solidarity of craft. workers would back each other up, other workers who were in their craft, occasionally members of other crafts, but that didn't necessarily extend to all members of the working class, in particular unskilled workers. There was a development of ideas of class at this time, that there was a working class that had concerns in common that separated them from the class of factory owners, but these were still in their infancy at this point. Most of the solidarity at this point was limited to the craft level. But solidarity is important in that it indicates a move away from individualist solutions. So for instance, a journeyman shoemaker, rather than relying just on his own abilities, would ally with other shoemakers in a union and fight for their interests together. Now, why am I standing here in a cemetery to talk about the artisan period in New Jersey labor history? Well, I'm standing in front of a memorial to a very important New Jersey labor leader, Peter J. McGuire, who's behind me here. Peter McGuire was a socialist in his early years and continuing in later years. In 1873, he was arrested while occupying the office of the New York City Police Commissioner, who had refused to give unemployed workers a parade permit when they wanted to have a demonstration to demand unemployment relief. Later on, he was one of the founders of the American Federation of Labor, the most important craft federation in American labor history, and one that we'll see a lot in the future in this course. He was one of the founders and a vice president of that union. He was also the founder of the Carpenters Union. The Carpenters Union was one of the largest and most important of the craft unions in America. Peter McGuire is also credited with founding Labor Day, the holiday that we all celebrate at the beginning of every academic year, and I think a lot of people forget or just never knew what the meaning of Labor Day was at the beginning, but Peter McGuire and others wanted to have a day to remember the contributions of working people to our country. McGuire died in 1906 in Camden, and he was buried here in Pennsauken. So just to reiterate the two themes of this module, first the craft form of work, the craft traditions, also known as the artisanal or skilled work traditions. And the second is the beginnings of the craft form of unionism. We'll learn about another form of unionism later on, but in the 19th century, the most important form of unionism was craft unionism, one of the forms that's still with us today. And here's the statue to Peter McGuire. And behind him, there's an interesting monument. If you can't read that, it says, "In memory of Peter J. McGuire, founder of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America and father of Labor Day." And here we see the symbol of the Carpenters Union. Shows the tools of the trade, along with the phrase in Latin, labor omnia vincit, labor rules all. And here's the actual grave of Peter McGuire, just a few hundred feet away from the memorial to him.